Good evening and welcome to Spooky Tales with Steve the Cat, your place for a fun conversation about horror movies. Tonight, we talk about a film that isn't an old slasher film, but is intended to look like an old slasher film. So it's a bit of an acquired taste. So we'll talk about that film plus some other stuff I watched this week. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. We're glad to have you here. Now pour yourself a drink and sit back, because here we go.
Tomorrow night, two of the most storied programs in college football square off in what's historically been called the third Saturday in October.
Tonight's top story takes us to the death row unit at Bowling Prison in Mobile, where spree killer Jack Harding is set to be executed tonight at midnight.
Well, howdy, Mr. Policeman.
Well, it's Sheriff, actually, hon.
Oh, well, howdy, Sheriff.
I like your pajamas.
Thank you. I like your sheriff suit.
You're saying that you think he's still alive, aren't you?
I know he is. Sheriff Shanks, we were at that execution last night. And despite of what you might be reading in that paper, that monster's still walking this earth. And I believe he's right here in Hackleburg.
Well, hey, it's probably just a fuse or something. We'll get in here, switch that fuse out, we'll be watching the game in no time, all right? Nothing to worry about.
Denver?
John Paul, get away from there!
Joke's over. Wake up, everybody. Hey, everybody wake up. Hey.
Hey, that sumbitch is gone. I mean, virtually vanished. Don't be concerned, though. He can't get too far. I'm on his trail.
Let's get into our featured film review for the evening. Tonight we are going to talk about a film called The Third Saturday in October. Yes, this is a horror slasher film that was released in the year 2022, so it's a fairly recent film. Directed by Jay Burleson, and the cast includes Darius Willis, KJ Baker, and Allison Shrum. So, let's get into a conversation about The Third Saturday in October. If you sit down to watch The Third Saturday in October, what you should expect is an amusing attempt to create something that looks like a campy slasher film from the 1970s. Now, this is not a film from the 1970s, but it is intended to act and look as if it is one. So it's an homage to all those bad slasher films from the late 70s, early 80s, cashing in on the slasher film craze. If you like Friday the 13th, you might like this film. Basically, if you like any number of bad slasher films from the 70s and 80s, you might like this film. You know, Madman, Slaughterhouse, etc., etc. This film is intended to be reminiscent of those. So let's get into the scale we like to use for judging films. On the far left side of the scale, we have very campy films, such as Jason X. On the far right side of the scale, we have very serious films, such as The Silence of the Lambs. As always, this scale is not intended to judge the quality of the film. It is intended to set your mindset and let you know what your mindset needs to be going into the film in order to enjoy it properly. If you sit down to watch The Third Saturday in October, you need to understand that it is a very campy film. You need to have your expectations shifted all the way to the left-hand side of the scale. Don't expect a serious film. Don't expect serious filmmaking. Don't expect good production values. Don't expect good acting. This film is intentionally bad and intentionally reminiscent of bad slasher films from the 70s and 80s. Now, before we go any farther, we need to get into our vocabulary lesson. This is the part of the show where we discuss new and innovative words and phrases in an effort to stay ahead of social media bots and algorithms that would otherwise try to ban our conversation. The social media bots and algorithms are always getting smarter, so our conversation must evolve to stay ahead of them. 2 words this week. Our first is the phrase tree felling. Tree felling refers to the action in a horror movie, the act of one character killing another character using a chainsaw. Now, if you've not heard the term tree felling, maybe you've heard one of the colloquial forms, including lumberjacking and releasing the woodsman. Our second term for this week is pop-tarting. Pop-tarting is the action of an undead horror movie character popping up and out of a casket like a breakfast pastry from a hot toaster. So, these are your vocabulary terms for the week. Please keep these terms in mind. They will become important later in the episode. So let's get into a film summary of this film. In this film, all the people in a small Alabama town are set to watch the big third Saturday in October college football rivalry. Yes, that is where the title of the movie comes from. The third Saturday in October is traditionally the day between the big game between Alabama Mobile and Tennessee A&M, 2 fictional colleges in this movie. Meanwhile, at a prison not too far away, killer Jachariah Harding is executed for multiple murders after having been on death row for more than a decade. Unfazed by his apparent execution, Harding leaps out of his casket and escapes into the night, killing the guards set to bury him in the process. Harding now sets his sights upon the townspeople as he resumes his bloody work. Yeah, that's really all there is to this film. It is your typical Michael Myers comes home kind of film. Killer gets released from prison, in this case executed and then released from prison, and as an undead killer comes back to resume his bloody work. Which, of course, brings us to our villain profile. Our villain for this film is Jachariah Harding. Here you see a shot from him from towards the end of the film once he acquires a Halloween mask, of course. He is of the class of undead slasher. His special powers include invulnerability and stealth. And his signature weapon is, he uses multiple weapons, including pruning shears and a chainsaw. So that is our profile for the villain, Jachariah Harding. So let's talk about the things I liked about this film. This movie does not take itself even a little bit seriously. I kind of enjoyed that. If you are a fan of bad 70s and 80s slasher films, you may find this amusing. Now, I say may, it's not necessarily going to amuse you. Bad films aren't automatically amusing, but this one is intentionally bad in an intentional attempt to be amusing. So if you're a fan of those 70s and 80s slasher films, if you like to watch them ironically, if they're kind of a guilty pleasure, you might enjoy this film. The film looks like it has been sitting on the shelf of a video rental store since 1979. It's grainy, the use of the colors and such make it look like a piece of 1979 film. Not sure that the aspect ratio is 1979, but beyond that, it looks like it's been sitting on a video rental shelf store for decades. The killings escalate in ridiculousness as the film goes on. Now, at the beginning of the film, the killings are rather mundane, and that's a low-budget trick. Strangulations are cheap to show on camera. That you don't require blood or prosthetics. So at first you think, oh, this is just going to be a bunch of strangulations because they have no special effects budget. As the film goes on, the killings do escalate in ridiculousness. Now, the special effects are not great. They're meant to be a tribute to the 1970s special effects of some of the lower tier films, but they do at least escalate the killings as the film goes on. And finally, just keep in mind that the film's goal is to amuse, not to frighten. Now, the third Saturday in October is not a film without flaws, so there are some things that could have been better. And right off the bat, this film does not take itself even a little bit seriously. So if you're the kind of person who's going to be bothered by that, this is not the film for you. If you are not amused by bad 70s slasher films meant to be enjoyed ironically, this is not the film for you. Just give it a pass. Don't watch it and then say it's a bad film. It wasn't intended for you. You were not in on the joke. The film is intentionally grainy and looks like it came straight from 1979. Again, your mileage will vary depending upon whether you find that amusing or not. The acting is terrible. There's no way around that. The acting is terrible. And the characters are largely unlikable and sometimes weird. They sometimes spontaneously start meowing at each other like cats for no reason that can be explained. And there is one character who disturbingly dances all throughout the film, and it's just unsettling. So let's get into Steve's scorecard for this film. Right off the bat, we have kills. I counted 14, a number of which happen off screen. Bare breasts, I counted 4. Insnappinating, does anyone get their head spun around backwards? Yes, I counted 1. Pruning, 1. Yes, we have 1 killing with garden shears. Tree felling, again we have 1 killing with a chainsaw. Pop-tarting, we have 1 incident of popping out of the casket. Hair pulling, we have 1. Face skinning, we have 1. Hammer time, yes, MC Hammer, you can't touch this. Somebody finds out it's hammer time. We get 1 of those. Disturbing dancing, I counted 5 different instances of Denver, the character who dances in this film, dancing disturbingly, and it's just unsettling and weird. Disturbing meowing. On 4 different occasions, the characters in this film break into just starting to meow at each other incoherently. And finally, ride the yellow mama. 1. What is the yellow mama? Well, stick around and we'll explain what the yellow mama is. Of course, you get some bonus features with this film if you view it, including but not limited to a Texas chainsaw-like voiceover narration at the start of the film. You get an execution in a big empty steel building, so apparently they just found an empty steel building to use as a set for their film. The Yellow Mama, she even has a sign. The Yellow Mama is the state's electric chair. She even has a big sign over her saying the famous Yellow Mama, and she's painted yellow and she's an electric chair. Do the protest signs use bad grammar on purpose? I found myself wondering this as they were showing the protesters outside the prison, and then it occurred to me that actually the entire film is an exercise in did they do it that bad on purpose. So really, they kind of gave themselves protection by intentionally doing some things badly. Anything that happens badly, they can say, oh, we meant to do that. Now, the killer keeps a low profile in this film by driving around in a hearse. At one point, prompting one character to ask, is that a hearse? To which her sister responds, no, it's a Cadillac. Well, yeah, it's a Cadillac hearse. Cadillac makes hearses. Anyway, there is lots of napping action in this film. No fewer than 5 characters take a nap at some point in this film. And finally, you get a stealth chainsaw attack. Oh boy, is that exciting. Now, you would think it would be difficult to execute a chainsaw attack stealthily given the loud 2-stroke motor that's attached to it, but you would be wrong. You can hide behind a chair, pop out, crank up the chainsaw, and strike with it all in one fluid motion. This film proves it. So let's get to Steve's final score for this film. I'm going to give it 1 paw out of 4. Now that is graded on the curve. 1 paw out of 4 objectively. If you enjoy bad slasher films and can enjoy one ironically, this is more like a 2.5 paw film. It's more enjoyable than 1 paw would indicate, but it depends entirely upon your tolerance for that sort of thing. So we're going to say this is an intentionally bad film meant to amuse, not scare, and made to look like an old film from 1979. Your enjoyment will depend entirely upon your preference for bad slasher films from the late 70s and early 80s. So, that is the third Saturday... Let's try that again, folks. That is the third Saturday in October. That is our featured film review for the evening. And now a word from our benevolent overlords at PBDC TV, your nightly heartbeat of horror.
Blazing skies, the world in flames, nuclear fire, unforgiving claims. I survived through the dust and ash, came back in time to give you a chance.
We've reached the end of another episode of Spooky Tales with Steve the Cat, but before we go, we're going to take just a couple of minutes to talk about some of the other stuff Steve watched this week. Now, we've been doing Spooky Tales with Steve the Cat for several years now, and from time to time we're asked a question. How do you choose the movies you use in featured film reviews? Now, choosing movies for other stuff Steve watched this week is not that difficult. It's just a kind of a list of stuff that I watched this week and a quick review of whether it's good or not. Featured film reviews are a little trickier. They need to be something that I can talk about for 15 minutes, and I try not to do bad movies. I try to stick to movies that I would recommend that you watch, rather than spend time reviewing bad films. So, there are several strategies to finding a film for a featured film review. Strategy number one is to use something that you have seen before and vaguely recall being worth a good review. I do watch a lot of horror movies that I don't do featured film reviews on, so sometimes I come across one and say, hey, I think I remember this one being not bad, let's give it a try. There is a risk to this strategy, of course, and that risk is poor recollection skills. That brings us to a film called Pitchfork. Pitchfork is a 2016 American horror film that I found on Tubi free with ads. Now, Pitchfork, I can summarize thus. The complete plot synopsis from Wikipedia is as follows. Hunter and friends travel back to his family farm in rural Michigan after sharing a deep secret with his conservative family. Yes, Hunter has come out of the closet to his conservative family, so his New York friends travel back to the family farm with him in the hopes of having a barn dance. For some reason, they are obsessed with the idea of having a barn dance in this film. A festive night turns into horror, as one by one they are all stalked by a deranged killer wielding a pitchfork. That's it. That's the entire description of this film. That's actually a pretty good description. I couldn't come up with anything more if I spent a day writing it. That pretty much sums it up. Guy with a pitchfork starts chasing down people attending a barn dance. So the pros to this film are that there are a large number of kills and respectable practical special effects. Maybe not earth-shattering practical special effects, but not bad. The con to this film is that, well, it is not particularly interesting when all is said and done. So the verdict is meh. It's okay if you're looking for a cheap slasher film, but it is nothing special. There are many other films that are equal to or better than Pitchfork online. So the bottom line here is, I thought I remembered this being a better movie than it turned out to be. So no featured film review for Pitchfork. else do you choose movies that you use in featured film reviews, you might wonder? Well, there's another strategy. Strategy number 2 is to look for films that have sequels. The theory being that if there is a sequel, at least someone must have liked the first one. The risk to this strategy is, of course, the public's poor taste. That brings us to a film called Hayride. Hayride is a 2012 American horror film that I found on Tubi free with ads. Rather than try to summarize Hayride for you, I'm just going to give you the complete plot synopsis from the IMDb database. It's all of one paragraph. A college student returning home for Halloween is forced to face his childhood fears when an escaped killer takes refuge in his family's haunted hayride. Yeah, and that pretty well sums it up. It is your typical real killer loose in the haunted attraction kind of film. Haunted hayride with somebody killing people for real. Now, this does on paper seem to have some potential to it because the killer uses many different types of weapons. The killer, for example, uses an axe, a hammer, a pitchfork, a chainsaw, and there are even bear traps used in this film, so it has potential. But, interesting coincidence, the killer in this film is named Pitchfork. Same as the film we just reviewed, called Pitchfork. So the pro to this film is it has a high kill count. The con is that it is so boring. How can a film with so many kills be so dull? I take notes on these films, and if I don't take that many notes, that's usually a bad sign that it's not a very good movie. I'm going to read you my entire notepad of notes for this film because it is very short. I take notes as bullet points, so let's just knock off the bullet points. Bullet point number 1, lots of opening exposition. Number 2, opens fairly slowly. Number 3, and yet even more opening exposition. Number 4, the opening campfire story is so poorly lit you can't tell what's happening. Next bullet, and we're over 1/3 of the way through and they're still talking. Next bullet, still talking. Next bullet, this film has no special effects budget. Next bullet, how can a film this dull have so many kills? And final bullet, the kills are all boring or off screen. It is a dull, dull film. So the verdict is you should avoid this one. It is painfully boring with very little practical special effects budget. There is nothing redeeming about this film. And yet there is a sequel. There is a sequel, avoid it. So that is Hayride, and that is the summary of other stuff Steve watched this week. Thank you for listening. That brings us to the end of another episode of Spooky Tales with Steve the Cat. Thank you so much for joining us. We're glad you were able to stop by. If you did enjoy the show, then please check us out on social media. You can find Steve the Cat on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, or X, or whatever it is they're calling Twitter now. So please stop by and hit that subscribe button. Spooky Tales with Steve the Cat is available exclusively through the PBDC Collective Incorporated, now legally incorporated and still your heartbeat of horror. You can find us on the web at psychobunnydc.com, or you can check us out on YouTube, Facebook, Twitch, Instagram, Twitter, Rumble, and Patreon. That wraps up the show for this week. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll be back again in 2 weeks with another all-new episode for you to enjoy. But for now, thank you for watching and have a great week. Good night, everybody.